It's time to get ready for the Buffalo Bills Week 12 contest against the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm joined by Locked On Eagles host Louis Dibiase to discuss it today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Crossover Thursday right here on Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills. We are presented by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code in all lower cases, LockedOnNFL, for your first deposit match up to $100. Louis Dibiase here joining you. Crossover Thursday, I'm the host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, joined by Joe Marino of Locked On Bills. A big-time matchup this Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field. National television, Jalen Hurts versus Josh Allen, Eagles versus Bills. Joe, we're going to get into everything today about this matchup, storylines, matchups to watch, the keys to victory. And it's interesting, man. I think when you looked at this schedule, you know, in March and April when it came out, you would think this is a different situation for these two teams, probably both fighting for a top seed in the conference. The Eagles at 9-1, they're fighting for that 1 seed. The Bills at 6-5. Kind of surprising they're on the outside looking in for the playoff picture. But, you know, at 6-5, they still have a chance.
Yeah, they have a chance, but it's a tough schedule, which, of course, includes this next one here against the Philadelphia Eagles going into the bye. And then you have at the Chiefs, you got Dallas, you got at the Chargers, Dolphins, Patriots. I mean, it's a tough schedule the rest of the way. And the Bills have not set themselves up well in terms of margin for error, right? You mentioned a 6-5 record. Right now, they're on the outside looking into the playoff picture, the 8th seed, looking up at the Steelers and the Texans and the Browns in the AFC. And that doesn't even get into the possibilities of winning the AFC East, which will, it's going to be a tough schedule. A tough thing to do, especially when you consider how easy the Dolphins' schedule is over their next 4 games. And so the Bills are definitely not in great position, but they're still in it. And obviously, I think they received a little bit of a spark with the firing of Ken Dorsey and bringing in Joe Brady to be the offensive coordinator. That looked good against the Jets, but how does that sustain itself against a great team on the road here against the Philadelphia Eagles? It's a big one for the Bills. They would ideally get this one, but they're going to have to put together their best effort to win on the road and get an upset.
Yeah, again, on the outside looking in, and you look at like a week ago, I think it was looking pretty daunting after that loss to the Broncos at 5-5. You fire your offensive coordinator. But I don't know, Joe, after that Jets win, does it feel more positive after the way Joe Brady looked like had a much better game plan than Ken Dorsey has in the past? And when you look at the Steelers and Browns, they've lost their starting quarterbacks. The Steelers lose that game. It does feel like even though they are the 8th seed right now and they're at 6-5, I think it looks way better, the situation they're in right now, than opposed to the situation a week ago.
Well, they got to win. That's the thing, is they got to win football games, and it certainly feels like they got a 1-game bump, at least for the offensive coordinator switch. But how does that sustain itself? How do the Bills find more consistency? It's been bigger than just, Ken Dorsey and maybe some of his shortcomings as the offensive coordinators. There's been execution issues. There's been coaching blunders. Defensively, they have some injuries that have kind of taken away from their performance earlier in the season. And so how much of it was, okay, you put it together at home against the Jets, and now how do you sustain that the rest of the way and find consistency? Like, if you look at the Jets game and project things moving forward, you feel great. But when you look at the other 10 games, you realize that this has been an inconsistent football operation, and that can't be the case going up against these really good teams the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for the Eagles, you look at right now at a 9-1 record, they're in place of that 1 seed in the NFC, but it's kind of been an inconsistent year too. I feel like for both sides of the football, it hasn't been as smooth of a ride as it was in 2022, where it felt like they were kind of just coasting through the regular season. They've had their ups and downs despite that 9-1 record. And I think, though, the good thing about this Eagles team is they're just finding ways to win football games, even in situations where maybe they shouldn't, like this past Monday night, a big win over the Kansas City Chiefs, an emotional game. Joe, I'm just hoping for the Eagles it's not a come-down game, right? That was an emotional victory, a rematch of Super Bowl 57, but they really do take this schedule in this season day by day, game by game. That's what head coach Nick Sirianni preaches, and it's cheesy, but I think they really do take it seriously. So for the Eagles, I think, and really the entire NFL, I don't know if you agree, but it feels more inconsistent for even the good teams at the top of the standings.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I've obviously paid close attention to Philadelphia this year, and I expect a lot. I think this is the best roster in football. They won the NFC, right? We're not talking about a middling team in the league. There's high expectations. And when I look through their schedule, they played a lot of close games against teams that you really wouldn't expect to be the case. Like you mentioned, contrast that year over year, and they were boat racing these teams. And I kind of look at their schedule and I think, well, I thought maybe their most complete performances against Tampa Bay back in week 3, right? And so that I think gives you some hope for the Bills side of things here. I mean, you talk about schedule. I mean, the Eagles are right in the middle of an absolute gauntlet, right? I mean, it started 2 weeks ago, right? With the Dallas game, they win that one. They handle Kansas City, then they have Buffalo, of course, this week, and then the Niners and Cowboys and Seahawks. I mean, it's a who's who of talented teams. Of course, if they want to be the 1 seed in the NFC, it's a tough stretch for them as well. And maybe the Bills can get a little bit of help, if you will, coming out of that Kansas City win. Like you mentioned, an emotional one. We saw Nick Sirianni fired up in the tunnel afterwards, kind of spitting back at the Chiefs fans a little bit. But it's a championship caliber team that understands that it's a week-to-week league. And so I'm sure that despite some of those things and narratives that you could put into the situation, I think Philly's going to be ready to go at home.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, they've been inconsistent, but it's not like they haven't beat good teams either.
Right.
Sure, they probably should have lost one of those games to the Washington Commanders, and Tampa Bay kept it close. The Rams, inferior opponents from a roster standpoint. But at the same time, you mentioned this gauntlet of a schedule. The NFL, again, was not kind to either one of these teams in November or December. But the Eagles so far have passed these tests. You mentioned the Dallas game. That was a big win at home against a divisional rival who's right on your tail in the standings. Even before that, though, they beat the Miami Dolphins on Sunday night. You took down Kansas City. So they have passed these tests. For the Bills, I think they need this win more than the Eagles. Not to say the Eagles are going to get lackadaisical or complacent in this matchup, but I think that's something to keep an eye out for just based on the standings, right? I think Buffalo needs this win.
Oh, yeah, no question about it. I think the path for the Bills is 4-2 down the stretch. I think that's like the being realistic and even a little bit of optimism baked into that. Sure. Now, here's the challenge, right? You'd love to get this one, but if you were going to go 4-2 and you were going to pick 2 games to lose to, you pick this one. It's not a conference game, right? In Dallas, those would be the 2 games that you would choose to lose if you had to pick, right? That's a weird scenario that I'm putting them in. You like the Bills, they would choose to go 6-0 if they could, but if they were to go 4-2, this would be one that you may be okay with dropping, although you want to get momentum, right? You're going into your bye week, coming out of the bye week playing Kansas City. So in some ways it feels must-winny. But also, if you're going to drop one, this would probably be an okay one, but your margin for error, like we said, is going down. And for the teams that are ahead of them, like you mentioned, they got the bad quarterbacks, all that type of stuff. They have soft schedules, though. You know what I mean? So it's balanced out quite a bit. So the Bills, take 1-0, right? That's the cliche thing to do, but 1-0 every week, and this week your problem is the Philadelphia Eagles.
Got a lot of fun matchups to take a look at in this game. Eagles-Bills this Sunday in Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field. This is Crossover Thursday with Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills. Today's episode of Crossover Thursday right here on Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills. We are presented by PrizePicks. It's the most fun, winning up to 25 times your money this football season with daily fantasy. All you got to do, select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. Plus, with the basketball season here, you can now pick a combo projection across football and basketball from the Specials League, which is awesome. I'm a big-time basketball fan, too. I've been in on this action, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could take LeBron James and, let's say, Devonta Smith at a 10.5 combo of 3 points made and receptions. Also, if you want to play alongside some of PrizePicks' favorite players, you can do this as well, like rapper Meek Mill for Philadelphia fans. I'm sure you're in on that. Comedian Andrew Schultz as well. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. PrizePicks also even offers a reboot policy that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. They are changing the game. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use that promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles, Locked On Bills your first listen each and every day. It's Crossover Thursday. Guys, want to let you know as well, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Louis Dibiase joined alongside Joe Marino. All right, Joe, let's talk about some matchups for this Eagles-Bills matchup. I think it's a really good game on both sides of the ball. Both teams have their strengths and their weaknesses. Even for the Eagles, like you mentioned in segment one, might be the most talented roster in football, but they've had to overcome more this year with some holes to the roster based on injuries or some players leaving in free agency. So I think there are some weaknesses the Bills can exploit. Is there like a key matchup for you that the Bills need to attack or they need to win to get this win?
Oh, man, so much that comes to mind. But if I laser in on one particular matchup, it's Jalen Carter, the outstanding rookie defensive lineman for the Eagles that should have been the number one pick in the draft. He's the best player in the draft. Somehow Philly gets him, right? Against the Bills rookie right guard, O'Cyrus Torrence. And I think O'Cyrus Torrence has had a good start to his career. I think he'll be a long-term answer for the Bills at right guard. But I feel like over the last couple of games, I think he's hit a bit of a wall. And you saw him struggle last week. And it wasn't against Quinnen Williams. It was against Solomon Thomas and some of the edge rushers that would reduce inside. And I think he's had some challenges. And there's a huge challenge coming up in Jalen Carter, who has just a ton of athleticism. And that's kind of the deal with O'Cyrus Torrence is he's a big physical offensive lineman, but that lateral movement is not necessarily his forte. Well, Jalen Carter is going to be fully aware of that, and he's going to stress that ability to slide and stay square. And so I think his ability, Jalen Carter's ability to probably win that matchup and get pressure in the face of Josh Allen is going to be a big deal. And the thing is, what's hard is you could say, well, give O'Cyrus Torrence some help. Okay, well, the Eagles have other good edge rushers and other good interior rushers. I mean, like Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick. I mean, that's as good of an edge rushing pair as you're going to find in the league. They've got Fletcher Cox, right? I mean, there's talent up and down this line. So it's not just, well, that's the matchup you have to figure out. You got a lot of problems here with this Eagles pass rush and the challenges that they present. So the Bills O-line, their pass protection has been good this year. It's going to have to really meet this moment in a big way with all the different angles that Philly can attack you from.
Yeah, I think that would be, when it comes to the Bills offense against the Eagles defense, that might be the advantage for the Eagles, although, as you mentioned, the Bills pass protection this year, a lot better than in years past. I think that is where they stepped up big against the Chiefs. Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat made some huge plays in the fourth quarter, but it's incredible, Joe, like you mentioned. Yes, Sweat and Reddick might be maybe the best edge duo in the league. Sweat is number 5 in quarterback pressures this year. Reddick's at 8.5 sacks, despite not having one for the first 3 weeks of the season. And yet the rookie defensive tackle in Jalen Carter, who, as you mentioned, probably should have been the first overall pick, he's the one seeing more double teams than anybody. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, and I think he should probably win Rookie of the Year. So Josh Allen this year, according to Next Gen Stats, he holds the ball 2.87 seconds per dropback. You know, that's longer than the Eagles are used to this year. Quarterbacks have made an emphasis of getting the ball out fast with that first read. And so that's something the Eagles need to hit home with, because also, Joe, the Eagles secondary this year, not nearly as good as it was in 2022.
Yeah, and well, that'll be big for the Bills. And Josh Allen, I think, has had some moments this year where he's been a quicker triggered quarterback through the lens of Josh Allen. And I think that's going to be important. And I think with Joe Brady taking over this offense, you're seeing more spread concepts, less like 5-6 man protections a lot of times. So there's going to be a lot on Josh Allen to get the ball out and find matchups that he likes. And, I think the front for Philly certainly helps the back seven. But, yeah, I think there's some opportunities there. I know Bradbury's not necessarily having his best season. So how can the Bills take advantage of that? Now, one thing I wanted to ask you matchup wise in this game, because as you study Philly this year, I mean, good football team, but like their passing game distribution is very defined. It's AJ Brown, it's Devonta Smith, and that's it, right? And Dallas Goedert not available, right? Otherwise, he's that third guy. And so what's fascinating to me is there a path for the Bills to really just focus in on Brown and Smith? And that's a tough assignment. Those guys are really good. And I'm sure A.J. Brown, coming off of a game where he wasn't very productive against Kansas City, he's going to get like 15 targets. Like, I think that's probably going to be the pivot.
It works, yeah.
But how can the Bills do their best to force Philly to lean on these other players who have just not been productive? They don't have a wide receiver on this roster with more than 100 receiving yards. So how do you make them play through those ancillary components of their passing game? I think that's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done. You can try to, I mean, you'll get what the Eagles did against Travis Kelce and the Chiefs, and that was kind of a similar situation where what other options are we scared of beating us? Let's just bracket Kelce in coverage all game long. Yeah. Can you double A.J. Brown? Are you going to try to just eliminate him and Devonta Smith? I'm sure teams have tried that in the past, though, Joe, and it hasn't worked, because even last year, when Dallas Goedert went down, this was the same situation. They did not have that third passing target that would step up. Quez Watkins struggled a lot. This year, he's injured. They have Olamide Zaccheaus. They have Julio Jones. Neither one has really made an impact. They have no pass-catching options at tight end without Dallas Goedert. Like, the days of him and Zach Ertz together, those are gone. Jack Stahl is primarily a blocker. Grant Calcaterra hasn't done anything in his career for the Eagles over 2 years. Albert O, they traded for in the offseason, has been inactive outside of just one game this year. So, yeah, I don't know. The Eagles really don't have another option. They're going to need Devontae and AJ to step up and beat this matchup. Also, I think hopefully DeAndre Swift gets more involved in the passing game. He had 31 yards on 3 catches against Kansas City, so he had some explosive plays. But overall, yeah, it's going to come down to Brown and Smith just have to out-execute the other team. And luckily, against the Bills, I would say Rasul Douglas, who I used to love in Philadelphia, he's a playmaker. I think he doesn't match up well against Devonta Smith, so if they can find a way to get that kind of receiver on Rasul, that's normally who he struggled with in years past, they can still win that matchup.
Yeah, I think you'd ideally like Rasul on A.J. Brown as much 100%. As possible, and that's one thing they have done with Douglas is they haven't kept him to a side. They've had him kind of follow a little bit, so I think they'll try to get that as much as possible, but you know, it's easier said than done. I think in your head, you say, well, okay, if you can just take care of Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown and force them to go other places with the football, you're going to be okay. Well, like you said, there's a reason those guys have combined over 1,600 yards so far this season. And so you like the idea of that, but the how is a lot more difficult than just saying, hey, this is what you should do.
And then, Joe, I want to real quick before we take another break and get into keys to the victory here. When it comes to the Eagles' running game, it bounced back finally against the Chiefs. They were struggling, uncharacteristically so, without Cam Jurgens at right guard. I don't know if that's the reason they were struggling. DeAndre Swift, his yards above expected was at the bottom of the league for about a month. They bounced back against Kansas City. What does the Bills' run defense look like? Is that a matchup the Eagles can exploit, or how does the Bills' defensive line look this year?
Well, I think there's been times where the Bills' run defense has struggled. It does feel like when the Bills are serious about defending the run, they do it. They've gotten gashed for a couple of big runs more earlier in the season, thinking about the Breece Hall in week 1 against the Jets. And then there's been a couple of other moments like the Miami game. They held them to like 7 rushes for 29 yards at halftime. The Bills had like a 3-touchdown lead, and then Miami ran the ball, and the Bills went 2 high safeties and said, okay, like you can have all this rushing production that you want. But I think there's been times where the Bills have like said, okay, we know that stopping the run is going to be important, and they do that. And so I think their run defense, if it's susceptible in any way, it's some of the missed tackles, which can lead to some bigger, more explosive runs. So the Bills being short, the run defense is going to be critical. And obviously, I mean, the offensive line for Philadelphia, whether it's run blocking, whether it's pass protection, they are outstanding. You mentioned Josh Allen's average time to throw. I think Jalen Hurts is at like 3.11 in the season. Exactly. And so what's interesting is like the Bills went through this gauntlet of quick triggered quarterbacks and they couldn't factor in at all. But the last couple games against Russ Wilson and Zach Wilson, and please God, I'm not putting Jalen Hurts in that category, but all 3 of those are guys that hold onto the ball a lot. Their defense has been a lot better. And so, I mean, that just puts more stress on everybody when you hold on to the ball like that. And so, you know, your pass protection has to hold up for longer. I think that the Eagles have an advantage with their O-line against the Bills defensive line, but maybe if they have to block for longer, you can see some one-on-one matchups that eventually turn to the Bills. So that'll be key for them as well.
What do the Eagles have to do to win this game? What do the Bills have to do to get a win on Sunday? We'll get into that as we wrap up Crossover Thursday right here on Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills. All right, everybody, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Crossover Thursday. What an awesome matchup that's coming up this Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field. Joe, we've dove into the biggest storylines, the matchups as well to watch for Eagles-Bills. So I don't want to do like a predictions kind of segment here, but if you had to say like the Bills win, it's because of this.
Man, I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. It does start to me with the trenches, and that's what Philly has, man. They're good on the O-line, they're good on the D-line, everybody knows it. And I think the Bills are pretty good on the O-line and D-line. They're not great. And Philly just has dudes. They have dudes on top of dudes, O-line and D-line. And so how do you match up there? How do you win one-on-ones? Like, you're going to be isolated against really talented players. Can you win? So I think the trenches, both sides of the ball, is obviously where this starts for me. And then the other piece of the pie here that I think is a very important talking point every single week with the Buffalo Bills is turnovers, right? Giveaways and takeaways. Can you take care of the football? I think everybody understands that Josh Allen's turned the ball over the most of any quarterback every year. Going back to 2018, people don't talk enough about him also having the most touchdowns. It seems like that's more popular to discuss the turnovers, but he has more touchdowns than anybody, including Mr. Patrick Mahomes. So he scores a lot, but it certainly gives away the ball a little bit too much. And when that spirals, that's where the Bills kind of have some issues. And so obviously they need to take care of the football. And for them, I think getting some takeaways would be very, very helpful. Philly, not necessarily a team that's super courteous giving away the football, but they turn it over like 13% of the time, right? So it does happen. And so if they can have some fortune there, which the Bills have not had a lot of fortune with takeaways until the last game, Rasul Douglas taking away the ball 3 times against the Jets, and also had a fumble recovery the week before. But the Bills, that was their first interception last week since the Miami game in week 4, right? So, can you get the ball to bounce your way a little bit? I think it starts in the trenches, and then from there, can you take care of the football and can you take away the football? I think that's going to be important for the Bills.
I'm with you, and I think Jalen Hurts is a player that normally in his career has been very good at limiting turnovers. He does not throw a lot of interceptions. This year, though, you look at the totals, he already has 9 on the year. Contextualizing those picks, though, is not a lot that I've had problems with. Again, he's somebody that's aggressive, wants to give A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith chances down the field. But as you said, the Eagles have turned the ball over this year more than they have in years past. So the turnover battle, it's always key, especially when you have 2 quarterbacks, Joe, that I think you live and die by so much. I think there are very few quarterbacks in the league that make up as much offensive production as these 2 do, right? Just from the rushing standpoint. Also, I think both teams have had play calling issues this year, so they've had to overcome those obstacles as well and just, outperform other defenses despite some schematic issues. So that's going to be a huge battle. For me, for the Eagles defense, it's limiting Josh Allen's deep ball. I think the explosive plays, that's where he'll hurt you. Like, he'll throw some picks, but he'll make some incredible plays down the field. And the Eagles secondary, they've had their high highs this year. A good game against the Dolphins, the Rams, the Chiefs, but they've had some low lows. Like Sam Howell has cooked them multiple times. So don't let Josh Allen escape. Don't let him buy time and find Stefon Diggs down the field. It sounds obvious, but that's been something the Eagles normally are good at limiting, and that's Josh Allen's bread and butter. If you can make him beat you death by 1,000 paper cuts, I think that's the strategy that you have to take.
I'm also interested to see what type of success the Bills can have running the football. I know the Eagles, I think, are number 1 in run defense, right? They've also faced the fewest amount of attempts, right? So they face the most passing attempts, right? So it's kind of an interesting script. I think the answer is probably that they're 12th in yards per carry given up at 4. And I think the Bills are coming off of 2 really good rushing performances against Denver and the Jets. And I think at their core, I think they want to be a 2-dimensional offense. I think they're like 67% pass, right? So they're very, very pass aggressive. But I think they want to have that piece to lean into, and I think that can be important as you consider how do the Bills get explosive plays on offense. I think your run game and what that can mean for everything, whether it's your RPOs, whether it's your play action game, whether it's kind of just lulling some of those back 7 players to sleep and seeing what you can do. I'm also curious about Dalton Kincaid in this matchup, a very good young pass catching tight end against, kind of I don't necessarily think about Philly as great coverage linebackers, and I know that they have some young safeties, right? So like middle of the field, that's kind of what gave you some success against the Jets last week. You definitely need to make sure that middle of the field attacking is part of what you're doing this week against Philly.
No, I agree. And I think for both teams, being balanced on offense and having more success running the football is a key. I think both offenses can sometimes get away from it, even though the Eagles have been very good atop the league over the past few years. With Brian Johnson, they're more pass heavy than they were in years past. So a key for stopping both of these offenses, Joe, is just keeping them off the field, right? Long, sustaining drives. The Eagles are very good at that, where they can kill sometimes 8 to 9 minutes of clock in a quarter.
Yeah.
And that can be demoralizing for another offense and staying rusty on the sidelines when the Eagles' offensive line just takes over. And there's times where they just get going in the run game and they can't be stopped.
Yeah, I have great fear about that. I've seen it, man. What was it the Minnesota game? It was like, oh my God.
Killed an entire quarter. I mean, that's demoralizing.
I was watching it with a buddy of mine who's an Eagles fan, and I'm like, oh God, this is and there's nothing worse than not being able to stop the run, right? Where you're just like, it snatches your soul. You have nothing you can do. And I think the Bills, not often, but they have fallen to that a little bit. And I think even like in years past, like the last time they played Philly, right, was just like
2019,
100%. It was 100% that, right? Miles Sanders might have got a contract based on that game. And even against the Colts that same season, where it's just like, man, when these offensive lines just get downhill and start moving bodies, like sometimes the Bills just don't have a whole lot that they can lean into, and it happens to them. So that not allowing that to happen is going to be critical. And I think Philly, what's to their advantage is they can push that button at any point. So like you could say, get a lead. Okay, that sounds great. Well, first of all, you got to get the lead but try to make them more one-dimensional. But I think Philly's going to stick with that and really try to stress the Bills with their run defense. And, hopefully, new Buffalo Bill and former Eagles midseason edition, Linval Joseph can help with some of that.
For sure. It's going to be a great game. Eagles-Bills this Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field, the battle of the 9-1 Birds and the 6-5 Bills. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Guys, too, just want to let you know again, Locked On has launched that first-ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. For Joe Marino, I'm Louis Dibiase signing off. Enjoy the game on Sunday, and thanks for making Locked On Eagles and Locked On Bills your first listen each and every day.